All right, students of my principles class, how are you? I hope this PowerPoint presentation finds you well. This is actually just a continuation of the lecture that we started earlier this week. This is for the summer session C, term C, principles class. So it's not the full lecture of this entire chapter. It's just picking up about 20-something slides in. So we're going to go right into some of the variables that we want to look at. So let's get right to it. Before we do that, it's where we left off. We were talking muscle fibers before we left. We mentioned that this is genetically determined, the proportion of slow to fast twitch. Remember, slow twitch fibers have the greater aerobic potential and slow speed of contraction, and fast twitch muscle fibers have greater anaerobic potential, so without the use of oxygen, and a fast speed of contraction, the important muscle fibers for strength training. Again, these are genetically determined of how much a person has in their body, what makes them up. And that's just kind of the way it goes. It is what you are born with, genetically determined. So this was the slide that we left off on. The rest of this should be new. Overload, the overload principle. Strength gains are achieved in two ways. First, there's the increased ability of individual muscle fibers to generate a stronger contraction. And then there's the recruiting of a greater proportion of the total available fibers for each contraction. So more fibers involved, more strength that you can exhibit. Several procedures can be used to overload. So how can we overload our muscles? How can we make them work harder? Remember, if we do not overload them, they will not grow. We do not stimulate growth with keeping something at a normal load that does not challenge the muscles. If you want them to grow, if you want them to improve, you need to challenge them. We can either increase the intensity, so put more weight on, increase the number of repetitions. We can change the speed at which we're working out, so you can slow down your muscular contractions or speed them up. And then, of course, the overall training volume. Again, that decreased speed, or you can slow down the rest intervals, so don't give yourself as much rest in between, or some combination of all of the above. These are all different methods of overloading the muscle. There are a lot of variables that you can play with, and they're all going to be beneficial in helping your muscles to improve in size, strength, etc. Specificity. I love that word. Specificity of training. This is the idea that the training program must be specific to obtain the desired effect. So if you want to improve in a certain area of fitness, well, you have to train the muscles and the skills specifically to get those improvements. The specific adaptation to imposed demands, or the SAID principle, this is a big major concept that does appear in our course and in our field over and over and over again. Those of you that have been around with me for a while, you've heard it before. Those of you that are a little bit newer, maybe this is your first time hearing it, but I can guarantee you it will not be the last. Strength training exercises that mimic the movement patterns in a particular activity. Again, train specifically. Your body will adapt to the demands imposed upon it. So if you continue to challenge it, overload it, give it an opportunity to grow or improve in a certain area or skill, it will adapt specifically to what it is that you're doing. Now, I mentioned volume before. What is volume? Volume quantifies the amount of work performed during a training session. So it is the sum of all repetitions performed multiplied by the resistances used during a strength training session. Athletes will typically use high training volumes with low intensities to achieve muscle hypertrophy, right? Make the muscles grow, and low volumes and high intensities to increase strength and power. So this is where we change like rep ranges and the amount of resistance that we'll use depending on what our goals are. So if we want to make the muscles look bigger and grow in size, we're going to go on that hypertrophy scheme that looks at low intensities with high volumes. Whereas if we're looking to make the muscles stronger, we're going to go with higher intensity, so more weight and less repetitions. And that's how we're going to increase strength and power. Periodization. This is something that you will talk definitely about with athletes, but it should be true really of working with anyone. Periodization, or variation as some literature will call it, is cycling your training objectives. And this is a concept that helps to prevent overtraining. So what does it mean? Periodization is looking at different phases of how you're going to do things. So for instance, if you are an athlete and you want to train for your season, let's look at even a professional athlete. When they get to the in-season part of their training schedule, right? We'll look at an entire calendar year as your training cycle. The in-season part, where they're actually in the midst of their games and performing, they want to be at their peak performance. And so all the exercise and the work that they do during that component is going to be really structured around maintaining their high performance. Whereas preseason, we're looking at going through some specific training protocols to really ramp up the intensity in order to improve so that that performance is ready to go for the in-season. You've got postseason and off-season as well, and you're going to have varying training objectives. Now, for this class that we're talking about, I'm not worried so much about you knowing what goes into each one. For those of you that are moving into the upper level courses and are going to be in our bachelor's program, when you get to the strength training and conditioning course, you're going to talk a lot more about this, but it comes up in a few of our other texts along the way. Remember, this class is more introductory, so what I need you to know here from periodization is that we're going to look at different times of the year or different times of our training cycle, and we're going to train differently, either more or less within them, in order to maximize our outcomes and really accomplish our objectives. Now, there are a few different ways of periodizing things. The one I gave you was more of the classical periodization model, where your emphasis is going to be maximum strength development. There's also reverse periodization, where you're looking at muscular endurance. Or there's an undulating cycle, undulating periodization, where it's a little more, it's seemingly random. It's not random, but you'll go through strength phases, hypertrophy, power, endurance, and go back and forth, continue to shock the body and the muscles in order to kind of challenge it over and over. And that's an undulating periodization model. So these are important concepts, and these are ones that if you do have questions, especially if you are newer, I want to make sure we hit them while we are here in class. Isometric training. Isometric really means one length. This is where I might pause and then turn my camera on so I can show you something. All right, I guess we're stuck once we turn. All right, I think we're stuck. Once we start recording, that's it. We can't turn the camera on in the middle of it, which is unfortunate, but we'll work with it. Isometric strength gains are specific to the angle of muscle contraction. So an isometric contraction is iso means and metric means length, iso means one length. So think about something like a plank. Okay, if you were to perform a plank exercise on the floor, ask yourself this question: are you performing muscular work? Is there a muscular contraction going on? Are your muscles tensing up and contracting? Well, the answer is yes. Now, is the length of the muscle changing? So is it shortening and lengthening like it would, say, if we were looking at the bicep muscle when performing a dumbbell bicep curl? That would be an example of more of dynamic training, which we'll talk about in a second. But so that isometric training is a muscular contraction where your muscle length does not change. This is important. You will be asked about it. Again, one length. There is muscular work going on. It's just if you're looking from afar, there's not a lot of movement going on, but the muscle is contracted. Whereas in dynamic training, we are going through a full range of motion. Okay, we're going through a muscle shortening phase, and that is called the concentric phase. Some of you old school, gym goers might think of that as your positive. So if we're going to continue using the example of a bicep curl, your positive is going to be when you are holding the dumbbell down at your side, and then you bend at the elbow, right? Flex the elbow, bring your hand up towards your bicep. You're shortening that muscle. You're shortening the angle from where your hand in the resistance was up closer towards your shoulder, and that's your concentric phase. That's the shortening phase. It's your positive. The next phase is when you lengthen it, right? Because you're going to flex that elbow, you're going to bring it up for your bicep curl, and then you're going to let it down to perform your next repetition. So on the way down, nice, slow, and controlled, you're going to lengthen that bicep muscle, right? This is called the eccentric resistance phase, your eccentric phase, or the negative. So when you go down, that is your negative. Positive and negative, concentric, eccentric. Concentric and eccentric are the terms that you will hear over and over. They are part of the action phases of dynamic training as opposed to isometric training, which again is that fixed length where that muscle contraction, like there's no shortening and lengthening. It just stays as one. I keep going over it because you will hear about it, I can promise you. Now, how do we do that dynamic training? That's what you see in most strength training exercises. You can use free weights, fixed resistance machines, variable resistance machines, isokinetic equipment, or you can even do it without weights. You can use elastic bands. You can, as you have all seen at this point, because I know which group I'm talking to specifically. There are lots of different exercise modalities. You can do it with weights. You can do it just using your body weight. You can use a TRX and use the angle of your body in order to change the amount of resistance that you will receive. This is what you are here to learn. We are going to teach you all of the different methods and lots of different creative ways to engage in fitness training and dynamic training and any number of training protocols that you can think of that are going on in our field. We want to make sure that you are as well versed in all of them as possible. And this is just a slide kind of talking about what different things are. This is stuff you guys should already know at this point. Now, we just went on a field trip. We've got more coming up. You're going to go to gyms and see some more machines, right? You look at our lab. Our lab, we only have a couple of machines. We have a leg press, one that Doc and I both really are not a big fan of. It really doesn't have full range of motion and it doesn't have a lot of resistance, so it's not that great of a machine. We've got the free motion machine over in the corner, and then we have the lat pull down machine. And really those are the main machines that we have that are strength training machines. Everything else that we have is free weights or some of these other more functional training tools that you can use, and they're more versatile. So what are the benefits? What are the drawbacks? So free weights versus machines. Ideally, you'd want to incorporate both. Really the most important component that determines strength development is the quality of the program, the individual's effort during the training program itself, so not the type of equipment, and proper nutrition. So there are benefits and drawbacks to both, but there's reasons to have them, and they're both really good. Again, doing nothing is bad. Doing something is better than doing nothing. So if you've got a good program, you've got somebody that's really committed, if they go to a place and all they know is how to use machines, but they use them well, they eat well and they're committed, guess what? They're going to have good results. Machines typically are aimed more towards beginners because they kind of fix things in place so people can just do what's on the picture and they don't have to think much about it. But they also have a fixed range of motion. They sometimes will eliminate the need for some of your synergistic muscles, those muscles that help out along with the lifts. So it's really focusing more on your prime movers. Whereas the free weights, your dumbbells, kettlebells, that sort of thing, those are more dynamic. They're a little bit closer to movements that you're going to perform in real life. You're going to be using your entire body. You're going to be using more of your synergistic muscles to help out with the different lifts and exercises that you perform. So there's benefits and drawbacks. Machines are expensive, free weights are cheap, but machines are easy, free weights are hard. Depending on the kind of place you're at, depending on the kind of client you have, if you're a business owner, what your budget is, there's a lot of factors that go into why you might use one versus the other. But this slide really sums it all up. It doesn't really matter what type of equipment you have. It's all about how good's the program, How much effort is the person doing the program putting in, and how much are they going to get from it? And of course, their nutrition. If you have a good combination of those things, regardless of the equipment type that you have, you will find that there are going to be effective results. Intensity, exercise intensity. So we talked about this with cardiorespiratory exercise. This is where we did some of the math. We did percentages based on heart rate reserve. When you do it for resistance training, it's all about adding and subtracting weight, but really we want to make sure we're in the right ranges. So this is also a matter of percentages. So one of the things that you might do is do a fitness assessment where you find out what someone's 1 repetition maximum. So 1 RM, whenever you hear that, that's 1 repetition maximum, which is how much can you lift in one single lift, the absolute amount. This is a muscular strength test. We're trying to see how far that muscle can go at a given time. Once we know what its maximal capacity is, we then know what intensities we can use to stimulate your muscles in your body for certain types of growth that are in line with your specific goals. So a resistance of 80% of the 1 rep max is a general recommendation. Now, again, the percent of the repetition mass does depend on the muscle mass involved. Progressive resistance training, what you do here is you perform between 8 to 12 reps of each exercise. If you can do more than 12 reps, again, you shouldn't be able to do more than 12. If you can do more than 12, then you are not at that 80%. You are functioning at a lower percentage. So you want to make it so that that range that we're talking about is the maximum amount that you can do at that repetition range we ask. So if you can do more than 12, throw on a little more weight, play with it, figure out where you need to be. There you see there's some recommendations here, but we're not going to spend time on it. There's lots of different suggestions out there, so we'll skip this one. So your sets. So again, we're looking at frequency, intensity, time, and type. So in terms of time, when it comes to resistance training, that is the number of sets. That's the number of repetitions performed for a given exercise. So generally, muscular strength and muscular hypertrophy, if you're training for either of those goals, you will do either 2 sets, 3, or 4 sets. So 2 to 4 sets per exercise. If your goal is to improve muscular endurance, right? Muscular endurance is focused more on submaximal. How many times can you contract those muscles and have them keep going? You don't want to do more than 2 sets, and you want a very high rep range, so 15 to 25 repetitions per exercise. And the amount of recovery time, so how much time you take off between sets, that's dependent on the amount of resistance used during each set. So if you're working more in the strength realm, where you're putting an all-out effort in, and your muscles and your body needs time to recover from that in order to try it again, you're going to have more of a rest period, more recovery time. Whereas if you're performing something more at the muscular endurance level, you don't need quite as much recovery time. You need a little bit, and then you can get right back to work. Frequency, this is one we've already talked about. 2 to 3 days per week on all your major muscle groups. For achievement of significant strength gains, you're going to look at 8 consecutive weeks. So stay on a plan. 8 weeks is about the time frame you want to look at to see really, truly significant gains. After you do a strength workout, remember the reason it's 2 to 3 days per week is you do need to have some rest time in between. So take 2 days, maybe 3 days off in between the time where you perform exercises on the same muscle groups. So this is why kind of doing a split routine where you focus on certain muscles on certain days. This way you can get in the gym most days and you're getting things done, you're staying active, but you're still giving the muscles that you worked the day before an opportunity to recover before you start to go after them again. If you find that you are really sore, more than 2 to 3 days, that is an indication that you overdid it. You did way too much. So if you find that your soreness lasts more than 2 to 3 days tops, What you need to do next time you get in there and do that same workout, take the intensity level down just a notch or two, just so you don't have that soreness. If you're sore and you can't walk, you can't function for days on end, you've done too much damage. That's not what you should be going for. A lot of people think that muscular soreness, delayed onset muscle soreness, or DOMS, is this badge of honor where it tells you that that's the gauge to know that you were doing so much, that you did enough work. But the truth is it's painful, it's uncomfortable, it's not pleasant, and that reinforces the idea of not exercising afterwards. And if you're working with beginner clients and you're just beating them up and they're sore as heck for days and days on end, they're not going to want to keep coming back. Chances are you've been guilty of this at some point in your life. So remember this: if you are sore more than 2 to 3 days after, next time you do that exercise, just take it down a notch. Reduce the intensity. And we'll skip these frequency guidelines just because, well, actually, no, this one's good. Just give you an idea here. So if you're looking at general fitness, between 8 to 12 reps, 2 to 4 sets, like we said there, it tells you about how many minutes in between your sets. Again, if you do different muscle groups and you're looking at different parts of the body, you can minimize that time. Muscular endurance, right? Only 1 to 2 sets, higher rep ranges. And again, muscular endurance, lower amount of recovery time in between. If you're doing maximal strength tests, or not maximal strength tests, maximal strength workouts, you're looking at 1 to 6 reps maximum, 2 to 5 sets, and really 3 minutes. Again, your muscles are working at a higher level of their capacity, so they're going to need more time to recover. So 3 minutes is kind of the maximum amount of time. This is not what you would do like at a gym when you just get done and then you walk around and you start talking to people and then you go back to your set like 10 minutes later. That's too much recovery time. You're losing out on the window to really help maximize your growth. Look at these numbers. Keep them in mind. These are ones to keep that are going to be good for you. And then bodybuilding, 8 to 15 reps. But this is specific to bodybuilding, so we won't focus much on it. Now, in the first 8 weeks of training, right? Because it's the first 8 weeks. You're taking someone that really hasn't been doing everything they're supposed to be doing, and now they are all of a sudden. So in that first 8 weeks, if they stay consistent, you are going to see the biggest, most significant, most pronounced strength gains in those first 8 weeks. And that also will vary based on how much previous training someone has had. So if someone in their past, even if they haven't done it in a while, if they've been someone that has performed exercises before, someone that used to have a good workout routine, they will obviously improve. They'll still improve significantly in that 8 weeks, but compared to someone that's never done it, they are not going to have quite as high of an improvement level, if that makes sense. So someone that is a complete newbie, the first time that they do it, they are going to see gains that come on in leaps and bounds, whereas someone that maybe's fallen off the wagon and they haven't done it in a while, they're still going to see their gains, but it's not going to be as pronounced as someone that's a total rookie. So 40% increase is seen in individuals with no previous strength training, whereas you'll see only about a 16% in previously strength trained people, and only a 10% increase in advanced individuals. Again, those are significant. They're important. They do show that there's growth, and they make a lot of sense. So that doesn't mean someone, an advanced exerciser who maybe fell off for a little while, should be disappointed by a 10% improvement in strength. Because chances are, even though they were off, they weren't doing what they were supposed to, they probably had more strength than someone that had never done it before anyway. So of course they weren't going to improve as much. It makes a lot of sense here, but those are the numbers to kind of look at. Dietary guidelines. This is stuff you're going to hit upon more next month, but here's an idea to just keep in mind when it comes to your protein intake. If you want to focus on muscle growth, you want to have, as someone that's doing this, increase your protein intake to 1.2 to 2 grams of protein, right? So you'd have to look and see how much protein you get a day, how many grams you're taking in per kilogram of body weight per day. So You would first have to take your weight in pounds, find your weight in kilograms, and say, okay, I'm this many kilograms. So multiply that number of kilograms that you are times this range, right? 1.2 to 2.0, and that'll tell you how many grams of protein per day you should be consuming in order to facilitate that muscle growth. Okay, this is important. It's especially important for older adults, that 1.2 grams per kilogram per day. You'll spend a lot more time on this next month when you're in the nutrition course, but here it is just so you have an idea, because they go hand in hand with one another. Yeah, I'll leave this also for your stuff next month with Doc. We're not going to talk too much nutrition here. Not that it's not important. It is important, but let's keep our concepts consistent. Different kinds of exercises. So multiple and single joint exercises. These are recommended for a comprehensive training program. So for instance, like just doing a bicep curl, right? You're just flexing the elbow. You're focusing on one muscle essentially, and that's your bicep muscle. Well, that's a single joint exercise. Whereas if you perform a bodyweight squat or even a barbell squat, you're going to be flexing at the ankle, the knees, the hips, and then extending at the ankle, knees, and hips. Triple flexion, triple extension. You're using multiple joints at the same time. That's a little more functional. That's how we move in everyday life. There should be a combination of both of those things. Also, ways of training. Unilateral training is doing one leg at a time or one arm at a time, whereas bilateral training is doing both at a time, both at the same time. So think like doing barbell bicep curls versus doing dumbbell bicep curls where you alternate left and right. Unilateral versus bilateral. Plyometric exercises. I don't know how much you guys talked about that with Doc, especially my newer folks. We did talk about it for those of you that took the NASM class with me a couple of months ago. Your plyometric, remember NASM will call it reactive exercises, but plyometrics incorporate speed and explosiveness. The objective of doing these kinds of exercises is to produce the greatest amount of force in the shortest amount of time. A solid strength base is needed before beginning plyometric exercises. So this is not something that your beginners, people who've never really worked out, should engage in. This is for the more advanced exerciser. Risk of injury is higher than other modes of strength training here because of the coordination and the prerequisite strength that you need before doing it. Core strength training. What is the core? We're looking at all the muscles that really are in the trunk, so around the spine and pelvis. Those are your core muscles. Major muscle groups here, legs, shoulders, and arms, they all attach to the core as well. So a strong core will translate to stronger movement patterns in all of your other muscles in the body. We've got stability balls in the back of the room. You've seen those. Those are great. They're good for stabilization. NASM protocols use them quite a bit. You will use them throughout our program, so they're pretty cool. And elastic bands, those are also a good method of strength training as well. Some quick safety guidelines. This was something I've always been a huge proponent of. First of all, remember, safety should be your primary concern. Those videos where you see these guys in the gym like standing on a stability ball and then performing like shoulder presses and doing loaded barbell squats on top of a stability ball. I'm not making this up. These videos exist. Not smart, not safe. I wouldn't recommend it. Even I don't care how good you are. I think it's kind of dumb, to be quite honest with you, because what does that do to help you? It looks great. You might get some hits on YouTube. Good for you. If that puts money in your pocket, well, I guess that's good for you. But there's lots of gym fails too, and that might take money out of your pocket if you have to go to the hospital. Take exercises that involve all your major muscle groups. Select your exercises that will strengthen the core. Again, you want to strengthen your entire body. Don't lift weights alone. This is especially true if you are a beginner and especially if you're going heavy, because you don't want to get stuck in a spot where you've got nobody to help you. Prior to lifting weights, make sure that you engage in a good warm-up. Use good lifting techniques for each exercise, and don't lock your elbows and knee joints while lifting. Now, this is something that Doc and I have talked about. People get confused sometimes when you hear that term, lock out your elbows or lock out your knees. That doesn't mean do not go into full extension of the elbows or full extension of the knees. You should go into full extension, but there's full extension, and then there's like that stopping and like almost trying to push yourself into a hyper-extended movement pattern that could result in the load being too excessive and then injury. So keep that in mind. If you want to talk more about this whole concept of locking, I'd be happy to discuss it with you further. Good balance, good core, all that stuff. Do your big muscle groups before the little muscle groups. Exercise your opposing muscle groups for a balanced workout. Breathe, 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 and breathe naturally. And of course, avoid holding your breath while straining to lift a weight. That breathing is important. And finally here, based on your program selected, give yourself enough recovery time between your sets. You've already seen in this very presentation some recommendations of how much time you should take. If you experience unusual discomfort or pain, that is an indicator that you should stop. Now, I'm not talking about muscle soreness. Muscle soreness is one thing. That is a result of the exercise that tells you that you are doing work. If you have unusual discomfort or pain, stop. Common sense. On days when you feel fatigued, or or when you are performing sets to complete fatigue, just stop or just know when to quit, because if you sacrifice form, then you can wind up getting yourself hurt. And at the end of each strength training workout, do a little bit of stretching, bring your muscles back to their resting length, and get yourself ready to go back to whatever else you have going on in your day. If you're going to do your own strength training program, you should talk with your doctor first if you have any health concerns especially. Write down your strength training program, determine your stage of change. Again, that goes back to psychological principles. Choose what you want and then keep a record. Again, you don't know what you're measuring. You don't know if you're getting better unless you record it and write it down. That's all I got for you here in the strength training chapter. Again, very, very basic stuff for this month. There is so much more. There are entire courses dedicated to just this very concept. We're hitting the basics here because that's what this class is about. Now you have it. Now you should know it. Review this, and of course review the first half of the slides that we went over in class, and they will help you with exam 2. Thanks, everybody.